I affirm that the people's ability to acquire the means to protect themselves and their loved ones ought to not be impeded by state legislation. State legislation can be defined as the elected body which uses its own discretion upon which laws to dismiss or pass a new act of law. The means to protect oneself can be defined as a firearm, which is the preferred and most effective tool in self-defense. To be impeded is to be stopped or withheld from completion of a task, and to acquire something is to obtain that referred object. Later on, microstamping is an internal mechanism of a firearm that is assumed to be placed on the firing pin of a gun, placing a signature on the cartridge for tracking back to the gun in case of a crime. Now, as the affirmative, I value freedom and protection. Freedom and protection can be defined as the ability to have the right to obtain necessary arms, which enables a person to defend oneself or a loved one. My value criteria is to reduce the restrictive laws that have ultimately banned the sales of guns in California for the time being. This will promote the value of freedom and protection. Today we're going to talk about three things: death counts, requirements for firearms, and the unfortunately unrecognized good that firearms provide. Now, California holds the large reputation of having the greatest amount of gun-related laws in the nation. National average is about 15, while California reached 109 this year in 2020, and that's from the State Firearm Laws 2020. But California also placed second in the CDC's 2018 firearm-related mortalities. We had 3,040 deaths, with Texas, for example, had 3,500. Now, they have 15 gun-related laws, the national average. I understand that number is higher. It is very unfortunate, but my point to this data is that with a significant difference in gun-related laws, we should assume to see a drastic difference in firearm-related mortalities. Just a thought. Now, second point, as of right now, there are no guns available. California in 2007 passed the Unsafe Gun Act. That was deemed inactive or active in 2013. This act stopped the importation or sale of guns that were not deemed safe in California. Now, there were certain criteria for guns to be deemed safe. Some I agree with, some I don't. The parts that I agree with is that all these firearms, new ones coming into the state, had to be tested, where they had to shoot 100 rounds and have less than 3 malfunctions. Now, I believe in that because it is for the great safety of the user to not have a malfunction in the state of an emergency. Now, the parts that I don't agree with are that certain mechanisms were required to be in these guns, like MDs, magazine disconnects, or CLIs, chamber load indicators, that are completely redundant given what you're taught. Now, the California Firearms Safety Course tells you to disregard any extra mechanisms on the firearm and always assume that there is a round in the chamber, and you should act as such to be as safe as possible. Now, I do not believe that those mechanisms should be legally required in a gun if you're taught to disregard them. One other piece is the microstamping portion of that law. Now, in the law, it requires that a firearm have 2 points of microstamping on a cartridge. Now, if you're familiar with the internal anatomy of a firearm, that is physically impossible. Now, at the University of Davis and the National Academy of Science, they deem it unreliable for many reasons, some of which include the firing pin can be sanded down on its engraving so it doesn't mark the cartridge at all, and the firing pin can be replaced, as that is a common replacement in firearms, especially handguns. Now, with all of these together, I do not believe that a firearm should be restricted in terms of sale because of those unsafe loss of components. Now, because of this law, all this information is from the Pina and Horan case in 2018, you have been inadvertently denied your rights of the Second Amendment. Now, my third point is there has not been much good recognition for the positives of guns. Now, guns don't kill people. People kill people. Guns are a tool. Now, bad people will always have a way to get guns. From an article on the All 3DP in 2020, people can 3D print components of guns and build them themselves. Guns are constantly circulating throughout the black market. So a law-abiding citizen not having a firearm will not be able to protect you if law enforcement is not around. Now, Lawrence Reed, a gentleman from Reasons.com in 2019, put together and compiled a lot of data from other authoritative sources. Now, brandishing firearms have deterred 2.5 million crimes every year. Over 400,000 violent crimes deterred by firearms, and fortunately without any bloodshed involved. Now, there was also an interview of convicted felons, and if a felon or knew that their victim was armed, 60% of the time they would refrain from enacting in any crime towards that person. One example of lives saved by firearms is in Texas. You might have heard about the shooting in the church by Fort Worth. It was stopped by two gentlemen that were open carrying in that church. Now, this gentleman that started the shooting was ready to kill all 400 people in that mass, but he was very fortunately stopped, and this is a very good thing. If more people carry, if more availability for guns happens, there will be a safer society. Unfortunately, as of right now, in California, there are no guns due to legislation, and hopefully that'll change.